Okay, so we are in week 3. We're focusing this week on materials. And on Monday, we talked a little bit about supplementary material. We'll go over these again, but this is our focus for this week and next week probably. If we look at this mind map, this kind of gives us an overview of what we want to focus on. There's basically 3 areas that we want to focus on. One is supplementary material, which we'll talk about first today. Adaptation of content, how can we adapt the content? And also we'll talk about how to plan meaningful activities. So we're still in the planning stage of the SIAT model of how we can create a learning experience with our students who are learning English in our content courses. So we talked last week about understandings, essential questions. We talked about declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge, how to really plan those 4 aspects of our classes. Now we want to take those same understandings, essential questions, declarative knowledge, and think about how we can plan now materials, supplementary materials. We'll talk about this first. Now, as we talk about this, I still want you to think about the context of the unit that you're considering for your class. Okay, so always try to think in terms of that one specific unit as it pertains to, in this case, materials. Now, the materials that you currently use, what are some current materials that you use in your Spanish-speaking classes?
Multimedia is very common to use for me, and demonstration when it's a practical topic, demonstration, and sometimes pictures, some pictures, some videos, and they show to research related literature.
Alright, so let's take a multimedia first. Let's think about videos. How do you use videos in your classes more specifically with your students?
It's common to how to identify the patient when the patient start the delivery process, and how they get the historical medical.
Okay, history.
The medical report.
Okay.
Medical report, and maybe in multimedia, maybe PowerPoint, and sometimes in Word.
Alright, so when you think about video, do you use it at the beginning of class? Do you use it at the end of class? How do you use it? Think of can you give me an example, like in class, what it would look like, a typical use, a way that you would use video in your class?
With video.
Do you use video in your class?
In the first class, no.
Okay. In any class, like maybe think about the unit that you're thinking about from last
Okay.
week, and think of how long is your unit?
If I show them a video, before I must to explain what is the topic, what is the objective, specific topic, and I must to show them the highlights for when they are looking the video, they must to identify the highlights.
Okay.
And at the final, they
To close?
close.
Or summary?
Summary, yeah, a summary, and they talk about if they identify the topics.
Alright. And how do they identify the main keywords or key points from the video? What does it look like? What do they do to identify those key concepts? Yeah, you mentioned that when they watch the video, that they have to identify
Yeah.
certain key ideas or concepts or words. How do they do that in your class?
Before the video, I showed them what is the points to identify when they are looking the video.
Okay. And then once you play the video, what do they do? What do you have them do? What do you ask them to do? Or anything? Do they do anything when they watch the video, or do they just watch the video?
No. We look the video together, student and me, and when I want to remark some point, I can stop. I could stop and say, look at this is important.
Okay. And so you pause the video, you talk to them about certain points, and you go through the video that way. What do they do? Do you ask them to do anything special, or do they just listen?
It's very remarkable to this point when I ask oral exam.
Or oral exam?
En español es parafrasear.
Paraphrase?
Paraphrase.
So you ask them to paraphrase what they saw?
Paraphrase about the video.
Okay.
And I look para darme cuenta si ellos identificaron los puntos que estuve remarcando en el video.
Okay, so you're looking to see if they can identify key aspects when they paraphrase, if they are including key ideas from a video. Now, when do they do this? When do they paraphrase? Is it a text or do they speak? They speak. So explain that. What do they do? Like, how do they do that?
I told before in class after, it's a very good opportunity to speak with them. Before, it's a background of the knowledge about the topic, and the next class is the video, and after the video is a remarkable class to como un repaso, review.
A review?
A review about the topic.
So this would be the next day?
Yes.
Typically.
Typical in a week, I have 3 times class with them. Theory in class, video, and review about the video.
So let's look at that third day when they review, they paraphrase. So they're speaking, they're paraphrasing the main ideas of the video. How do they do it?
Sometimes I offer a quiz.
Okay.
A quiz by Moodle. I put in the quiz and they resolve the quiz.
All right. So let's think first about the paraphrase and when they speak on that third day. What do they do? How can you describe what it looks like? How do they do it?
For me, it's important this class because darme cuenta de si they catch the topic.
Okay. Pero ¿qué hacen ellos? Es decir, ¿puedes describir un poco la actividad? ¿Qué hacen ellos este tercer día cuando después viendo el video?
I start to describe the video, and I stop and ask for anybody for continuous, similar like wiki, oral wiki. I start start a phrase and continue another person, and continue another person, another person.
Based on the video.
About the video.
Okay. And does this happen? This is the third day, right? This is after they saw the video. After you describe, you pause the video, you're talking about key concepts. This is the third day?
Yeah.
Okay? So on the third day, you start a sentence or an idea, and then they like a chain. Like a chain, they continue talking about the key concepts. Okay? Now, let's take the same example using the video. Okay? You're already using multimedia, you're using supplementary material in your Spanish speaking courses. Now, let's think about this same supplementary material in a class that is now going to be in English. That is, they're going to start learning English, they're going to be watching a video. Now, maybe it's the same video, let's say it's another video. Maybe it's a different video in English. Okay, let's assume that it's a video in English. What would there be anything different as far as learning this content, having a video in English or a class in English? Is there anything that you would adapt or do differently to implement this video for this particular unit? Thinking of the same course, same unit, would there be a need to change anything, or would it work just as fine the same lesson?
I think they need to see the video one, twice, or three times because I think I put the video in Moodle and they see the video day before the second class.
Okay.
Because it's in English. In the second class is the second opportunity to see the same video in second time. Second opportunity, and I think it's more easy today for them to comprehend the video.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Is that something that you do now in your Spanish speaking classes? Or would this be different for your English speaking class? Having the video in Moodle the first day of the week where they can watch the video, is this something that they do now or in your Spanish speaking class?
In Spanish, usually the video is open to see whatever time. And in English, I suppose they need to see the same video as they before.
Where is the video available for the students to watch before class in your Spanish speaking class?
I put the link on YouTube.
And where do you put the link? In Moodle?
En Moodle, I put the link. Al inicio del semestre se les muestra todos los links y aparece semanalmente todos los videos que tienen que ir viendo ellos. Entonces usualmente se ven en clase en español y posteriormente están disponibles para que ellos los vuelvan a ver. Pero yo pienso que cuando son en inglés tienen que verlo un día antes de la clase.
Okay, pero how do you know, though, la diferencia en lo que estás describiendo es más como conducta de los alumnos? Parece, si entiendo bien, no sería algo diferente por su lado, así como su maestro. Ya están los links, ya está disponible, ¿verdad? En sus clases de español. Ya están los links desde el principio por unidad. Ahora, what did you do, or could you do, or might you do differently from your side, right? That that would be different or more helpful for English-speaking students.
Okay.
¿Sí me explico?
Sí,
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 como...
sí. Es que pienso que cuando va a ser en inglés para los alumnos, si yo les doy, miren, vean este video, los puntos que tienen que buscar con estos, vean estos.
Ok, es diferente, no mencionaste esto.
Ajá, no, es que digo, mañana vamos a ver el video, pero hoy veanlo, estos puntos, identifíquenlos en el video.
Y eso es para la clase de inglés.
Ajá, para
¿Sí?
que mañana lo vemos ya maestros y alumnos en el mismo video, pero como ellos ya lo vieron.
Y actualmente no estás haciendo con tus clases de español.
No, en español no, porque en español es como la primera vez que ven el video es en la clase.
Ok, pero hay dos cosas. Primero, en tus clases de español, ¿cómo sabes si es la primera vez? Tú dices, si está disponible antes del link, ¿cómo sabes?
Al inicio de la clase yo pregunto, ¿alguien vio el video o no?
Ok.
Usualmente no lo ven así como que al momento de la clase.
Este punto, lo que mencionaste, es la clave. Entonces, el primer día de la semana, antes del video, para sus clases de inglés, vas a hablar antes de la importancia a ver este video antes de clase. Así.
Siento que si yo les digo, mañana es un video en inglés.
Hello.
Mañana es el video en inglés, se van a asustar. A lo mejor si lo ven, hoy ven el video con una pequeña guía de lo que tienen que identificar, será más fácil en la siguiente.
Alright. So let's go back. We're going to go back and forth between supplementary materials and adaptation of content. But let's talk because we're in this discussion about adaptation of content. So how could your students adapt this video to make it easier to be understood for your students? How would you, and you're already kind of talking about it, but how could you adapt it? Do you think? And there's some examples here, but not all the examples. There's some other examples. These are just a few. But just looking at the video, how could the video be adapted? What could the students do?
Study guide.
Sorry?
With a study guide, they will follow the video.
Alright, so the study guide is something that you provide?
Yes.
Alright. Any other ideas? You've got a video. You're going to watch the video then the next day. How could you adapt the video so that the students could make it easier for them to understand the content of the video? What could they do? Anything that they could do? Or anything that you could do to adapt the video?
Okay.
One example, yes, the notes, right? You could make kind of some notes. Anything
Okay.
else that you could?
You develop the video? I developed the video? Or
A video that's already produced, I guess.
I
right?
actually produced.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a video that exists. You want to use it in your class, but you want to help the students before you watch the video in class to help them understand what could you do to help adapt the video.
What did I do is to emphasize the topics that they should learn, they should focus.
And how do you do that?
I said, as an example, we are going to see this video and put attention in the social responsibility.
Okay, so you just tell them.
Yeah. And I give, of course, a homework, a resume of the video, emphasizing in those points that I want to, that they learn. As an example, I have a video of Honda,
Have what?
Honda.
Okay.
Honda was the first enterprise that give the level to some air pollution in the United States. There was a law, the Mosky law, where they stop they prohibit to sell cars if they don't get certain level of air pollution. In the 60s,
Okay.
beginning of the 70s, it was a strong problem that they are going to stop the production of cars and the sale of cars. It was a law. It was a law. Approved and everything. So the first company in get these Mosky parameters were Honda. Was Honda.
So how did you adapt the material?
Well, I don't adapt the material. I only said what I want they put attention on.
Okay. Alright.
They in the video they said that they were doing the new motor, the development of this motor with low levels of air pollution because of the people, not because of the company.
Alright. So let's take a look. Let's think about how we can adapt this content from the video, and let's look at a couple of examples here that we can discuss. Alright, the first here is I want to talk about literature circles. Literature circles. Now, how many students, Martin, in your case, how many students are in your class?
25.
25 people. In the unit that you're thinking about for this class, how many students do you have?
I'm telling
30?
approximately 31.
Alright, so about the same. So, literature circles. Have you heard this term before? Literature circles. The idea with literature circles is you have your students form groups. Let's say groups of 4. And within that group of 4, each student assumes a role. Now, literature circles typically refers to some sort of reading activity, but it can also apply to listening activity in the case of a video. But in a reading, let's imagine a video, right? So you've got a group of 4. Each person has to assume a responsibility. That is, they have to listen to the video, and they have to listen for one particular thing based on their role, their responsibility, or their strength. Now, some examples. Maybe one person is responsible for asking questions about the video. Maybe one person is in charge of finding key words or key vocabulary or technical terms related to the video. Maybe another person is responsible for summarizing, kind of summarizing the whole text. Maybe another person is responsible for making connections. How does the video, what they talk about there, relate to some other context? Okay. Now these are just examples. The roles could be anything. But the idea is that the groups, let's say you have 30 students, you divide them up into 4 groups or whatever, and you have 6, 8 groups, whatever.
5 persons.
Well, but you can, 4 or 5, but let's assume 4. Doesn't matter, 4 or 5. It should probably be more than 5 because you want to have them have an opportunity to discuss. And so the idea here is that before they watch the video, they know what their roles are, first of all. That they know what their responsibility is. They don't have to listen and capture all of the video. They're just responsible for one particular part or aspect of the video. And so at that point, then they watch the video. Maybe it's in class, and this is where technology might help. Let's say your students, I don't know, do your students bring computers to class? Do you let them use computers in class? Yes? All right, let's assume you let them bring their computers. You come to class. Maybe you watch it once as a group, and then you have them watch them individually in their groups, and they each take on their own particular role and do what they're supposed to do as a group, but individually, each person kind of an expert in their own area as it pertains to the video. And that would be one way that we're adapting content, right? And this could happen, in this case, throughout the week. Yeah, they do some things at the beginning, before the video, where they just assign the roles, you form the groups, and they all know their responsibility. The next day, they watch the video, right, and do their activities. And then maybe the third day, they reflect or share or do whatever you want them to do. But each day, you're finding ways to adapt the content, right? And this would be one way to do this, using literature circles to divide up and have them assume certain responsibilities. Now, this is also linked to a jigsaw activity. So we have literature circles and the jigsaw. This says text reading, but it can apply to video. So let's keep the same example of watching the video. Let's keep the same idea of these literature circles. Let's say they assume their roles, they watch the video, and then we do a jigsaw activity, which each of the four roles that are the same roles of all the groups, right? So imagine if you have somebody in charge of vocabulary, everybody, there's a vocabulary expert in each of the groups. So each of the four roles, they form their own group. So everybody in all 8 groups, all of you who are in charge of vocabulary, you guys form your groups, and they all get together. So each now is a specialized group of those, those areas, and they talk, they converse, they talk and share and reach a consensus about their area, and then they go back to their groups, their original groups, and then share that information. So see how we have literature circles and then a jigsaw kind of relate to each other. The jigsaw is the whole activity. You divide up, you form groups, and then you form specialized groups, and then you go back to the original. Whereas the literature circles, just you form, 4 different roles, and you work and you stay within the same group. Yeah. Okay. So again, these are some examples, thinking about a video, how you can adapt the content. You're trying to make this a little bit easier and easier to understand, right? Instead of just watching the video right in class, or even just watching it alone, So, yeah, multimedia video. This is one way to do that.
Yeah. I'm gonna try.
Yeah, I mean, try it. These are things that even you could do in your Spanish speaking. Now, maybe it's not necessary or maybe it's not appropriate, but try to use what you're already doing in your classes and then see what you can adapt and see what any additional materials that you might use. Now, we talked about video. Martin talked about pictures, I think, or visuals and demonstrations. The idea here is to try to use as many different types of supplementary materials and think about the materials that you're using now in your Spanish-speaking classes and ask yourself, is it also appropriate to use those same materials in the same way for my English-speaking students? And if not, what ways can we adapt or even use additional materials to help the students? Now, in the case of Martin, he's saying he's using Moodle, it sounds like. So a lot of information is already posted, so that's a good thing, I think, for English learners because the content is there available. Just like we're doing in this class using OneNote, all the content that we discuss is available, exactly. You can always go back and look at this same drawing, this mind map, outside of class if you have to review, or if you want to see what we're going to do before class, right? Now, you mentioned guides, like outlines, right? This is all additional ways that you can make the information recorded text. Recorded text would be like you have text and there's an audio recording of the text. Either you're reading it or sometimes it's automated, like a computer reading it. But the students are looking at the words and listening to the words at the same time. Right? Whenever you're talking, like right now, I'm combining two different things. What am I doing right now? I'm combining two things and trying to communicate to you in this class at this moment. What are those two ways that I'm communicating or presenting content to you?
Speaking and showing.
Speaking and showing. So you're exercising your listening skills and your visual skills at the same time.
Yeah.
And I whatever you do in your classes, I would recommend that you try to combine as much as possible at least two different ways or means of
perception,
delivering content.
Oh.
Right? It might be a handout. I'll say, okay, here's a handout. Okay? All right, now look at your handout. Blah, 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 blah. We do this already and without technology. Say, look at your handout. Okay. All right, number two. Look at number two. Okay, now, blah, 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 blah. You're talking. So, but here, the benefit of obviously having it with technology or using technology is that now students can access the same information outside of class. Right?
Of course.
They can access it before class, after class, and even in class, depending on if they have a computer. So not only is it just the materials, but it's also how you deliver, that is, how you present the materials. How available is the material for your students? Now there's some others, marginal notes. If it's a text, so you give your students a text or an article or a case study. All right, look at the case study. Now I want you to highlight, highlight a text. I want you to highlight the, certain aspects, the problem of the case. Okay, can you find it? Okay, highlight it. Maybe have your students write it on the edge of the papers, right? Find where, the first solution is to the case study. So whatever you want them to do, have them take part and write out marginal notes and highlighted text. You could also use graphic organizers. These are all different ways that we can adapt the content.
Highlight is similar to remark.
No. Okay.
It's similar. Highlighted text would be simply just with a color highlighting the text that is important. With marginal notes, students on the side are actually writing. They're writing words, and maybe they're summarizing, maybe they're just identifying or reflecting, and they're writing some sort of reflection. Whatever that is, they have to write out some sort of notes. And you can certainly combine these two. You could highlight and make marginal notes. Combine those two, right?
Excuse me.
Okay. Graphic organizers. If you search graphic organizers, we'll do that right now. You go to your favorite search engine and we type in graphic organizer. And certainly you can go in and do a regular search, but what I like to do sometimes is click images and go right to the images. Let's say if I'm looking for a specific type of graphic organizer, maybe I want a Venn diagram, I want to compare and contrast two different things, two different concepts, two different ideas. I can easily find some graphic organizers to help me with this, a Venn diagram, where the students can put in what's similar between the two, what's different between these two. All right? I can choose any of these. If it's a process, some sort of process-based, I can look for that. If it's some sort of spider map, right, where there's an extension, right, that's fine. Or a flow chart. Okay? Many different graphic organizers that we can use in our class, or that the students can use in their class, where this will help them understand the content. This is the whole point. Maybe graphic organizers is not necessary in your Spanish speaking courses. Maybe it is. But think about the English language learner. How can we adapt the content so that they can understand it? Because they're going to need this assistance. It's not going to be like learning your class in Spanish. It's going to be more difficult. So we want to help them. Maybe it's a cause and effect. Maybe it's general to the specific, looking at these, understanding these relationships. Whatever cognitive activity you want your students to do, there's probably going to be some sort of graphic organizer to help assist, or a combination of these to assist the students. And certainly a graphic organizer is a very good way to do this, because the graphic organizer is not just a little text. So the students don't have to write a lot of information. It's more of a thinking exercise instead of just writing. They can think about it first, and then you can have them write or speak later on once they have this understanding based on
the canvas, no? As a canvas.
Right.
As a canvas.
As a canvas, yeah, like a canvas, right? So that they can kind of see conceptually what it is, and you can kind of communicate that and discuss it in class while they have these tools. Okay, so graphic organizers, do you use graphic organizers now in class?
Yes. In business, we use it very frequently.
So maybe there's some things you're going to continue using. Maybe you use the same tools, but maybe in a slightly different way if we're talking about English language learners. But whatever we talk about, try to think in terms of what am I doing now with my Spanish speaking students, and what do I need to do, or could I try for my English language learners, because it's probably not going to be the same.
The same.
Yeah, exactly the same.
So the content.
So, any questions really about the adaptations, content, supplementary materials that we've mentioned here? We've got realia, hands-on manipulatives.
Realia? Okay.
What's realia? What's this mean, realia?
There are the case of the real life, and the store is operating this case, and the students are watching how the store develop the solution.
Yeah, I mean, realia in the simplest sense are real objects. They're objects in the real world that are used,
Okay.
not specifically for teaching and learning. They're just real objects.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're into computers, and I need to know how to this technical apparatus, but how it works, this could be a reality. I'm going to take it apart. I'm going to learn all the insides and how it works electronically. That could be an example of reality. I'm not using it as a keyboard. I'm using it as an object to learn the insides of a keyboard, and this would be an example. So any object that is.
What means hands-on? What's the hands-on?
Okay, so hands-on manipulatives.
Yeah.
So kinesthetic learning. Think of kinesthetic learning. Things you do with your hands. And this would be another example of that. If I need to take apart this to understand the insides of a keyboard, well, I'm going to have to use my hands. I'm going to get a screwdriver. I'm going to take it apart, and I'm actually mixing now realia with hands-on manipulatives.
The difference is
You need a realia for hands-on.
Sorry?
You need a realia to use hands-on.
Not always. You can use a hands-on manipulatives and not be realia.
Okay, it could be
Right?
not
So-
real,
Exactly.
artificial.
Right. It could be artificial. Yeah. It could be kind of a game or something.
Simulator.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
You're learning how to fly. So the simulator is not a reality, it's an artifact. But it's a hands-on, it's a hands-on.
It's hands-on, but not quite reality. Now, reality is not always black and white, like yes or no, right?
Okay.
A simulation would be kind of in the middle.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the idea. It could be something out of paper. and you're doing something.
Okay.
So yeah, hands-on, but they're related. They could be something used together, or they could be used separate. Hands-on can be with pictures. Hands-on can be with anything physical. Hands-on is just using your hands. Doctors, right? In medicine, I mean, that's all what it's about. If you're doing surgery, kinesthetic, or you're using your hands to do this, you're building the skills with your hands. So notice with the different learning styles or preferences, we have visual, kinesthetic, visual and audio,
Yes, multimedia.
right? Even realia, the sense of touch. Just think
Kinesthetic.
about all of the five senses, right? Even visual demonstrations, even it could be something to smell, right? Depending on what it is.
Why?
What is the difference between demonstration and reality?
All right, so demonstration and realia. Realia are the objects.
Object.
They're objects. They're materials. I mean, we're talking about
The-
materials here, but it's real objects. It's materials used in real life. All right, and when I say real life, it means they're objects that are not designed for teaching and learning.
Just exist.
Right? Exactly, like a textbook is designed for class. So that's not really reality. That's designed, it's something for learning. Simulation is for learning. It's not, in the true sense, reality.
A frog.
So reality is just any object.
A frog in a laboratory.
Okay, a frog in a laboratory. A live frog, that's reality.
That's right.
It's an animal. A dead animal, probably. But it's reality, it's the real thing. Now, if you have a plastic frog, and you open up the plastic
is
frog,
not
and you've
reality.
got plastic lungs, plastic kidneys,
That's not
plastic
reality.
heart, then it's not reality any longer. But you could still be considered part of a manipulative if you're in there doing some sort of procedure. Now, demonstration is simply the act of showing something. So if I'm going to demonstrate how to dissect a frog, all right, I'm going to be, okay, watch me, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to demonstrate how to operate on a frog.
We in math.
Sorry?
In math.
Math?
See, mathematics.
Oh man,
We
yeah,
do demonstration.
exactly, yeah, demonstration. I'm going to show you how to complete the formula, or this
Demonstration.
whatever. This theorem. Watch it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to demonstrate how to do it, and then I want you to do it. So you do it, and they do it. Now,
Okay.
the act of demonstrating could be using realia or not.
Of course.
If I'm using a frog, I'm using it in reality. If I'm using a board, not so much. There's really no reality if I'm just writing on the board. If I'm using a mathematical equation to fix something electronically, then I could demonstrate and discuss theoretically
How to
what I'm
use it.
doing technologically. See what I mean? So
Yeah.
there's a relationship between all of these. It's not like always one. But the idea with the materials, with our English language learners, how can we use these different materials to help our learners
To understand.
to understand? That's all what it's going to be. They're going to need something different.
In
Whatever
the-
that is, it's probably not going to be the same as learning in Spanish.
To understand the language and to understand the concept.
Exactly. They have to do two things. They have to learn the language, and they have to learn the content. Exactly.
Content.
Both at the same time. Okay, so we have to be conscious of that and try to anticipate as much as we can problems that they might face. So the purpose here is to give us some ideas, some tools, some ways that we can try to help them with that.
Make the planning. No?
Yeah, exactly, my plan. Anything else from the supplementary materials or the adaptation of content that we need to discuss further? Or to discuss for the first time? I think most of these are
Is it
straightforward. Now,
the first one?
Now,
Or adaptation
Monday, we talked about this, scaffolding.
Scaffold, yes.
Scaffolding.
It's a quick.
Scaffolding is a way to adapt the content, but this is something now that you do very specifically in your class to make the students, to help the students understand.
Scaffolding is.
What is a scaffold?
Is to look for some.
In general, in the real
General.
sense, what is the word scaffold? We
It's-
take out the ing, the noun, scaffold. What
Is
it?
a quick saw or something like this? No.
I'm sorry,
A quick view or something?
It's an object. What is it? It's a thing. It's an object.
Ah,
And you see them all over Aguascalientes all the time.
okay, I was wrong. Excuse me.
Scaffold.
The advertisements or something like this?
No? Have you ever seen one of these older churches here in Aguascalientes? And they're repairing the outside of the church. So what they do is they build this structure along the outside of the church so that they can tear away, but they have to go really high, so they have to put together, and this is called a scaffold. Yes, scaffold. And have you ever seen how they put together a scaffold? We start with one piece, right?
Another one?
And the other,
The other?
and then they put another one, and they put another one.
That's
they put another
scaffolding.
one. So this is a metaphor, this is a term, and this is a term that's used now in teaching, it's very common now. But they borrow it from the metaphor of this scaffold
Scaffolding.
of, in teaching, how do we connect old information or known information with new information. So scaffolding is the process, the teaching technique. It's a way to adapt content to help our students by always starting with something they know. Every single class, you start with something they know. Instead of just coming in one day and say, okay, something new, and just saying, well, you should be able to connect what we did last week or yesterday or whatever. No, start with first something about what they already know. Now, it might be quick, it might be just 2 seconds, right? But the idea is that you start with something they already know, and then you build on that by scaffolding. You bring something new so that they can try to begin seeing this relationship between what they already know, presumably, to what they don't know. So this is a teaching technique that's called scaffolding, and we'll be talking about scaffolding all semester. This is a very researched notion or concept. If you type in and do a search in the literature for scaffolding, you'll see a lot of information. And this, again, is something now that the teacher does. This is something that we can do. All of this are things that we can do or help our students do to help adapt content for our classes. But scaffolding is primarily what we do. What else? Yes.
The one is I am a little blind.
Okay.
Marginal.
Take a look.
Marginal notes, okay. You already explained the judgment sound. Test reading. Yes,
Jigsaw?
jigsaw.
Right. So the jigsaw, I just call this the jigsaw activity. They call it jigsaw text reading, but it applies to anything. It can apply to reading or listening, even speaking, writing.
And it consists in?
The jigsaw, this is where we form groups
Okay,
with 4 responsibility,
Okay,
4 roles, and then each divide up in their own specialized roles. That's what's significant.
Keep a role
With the
in
jigsaw is they
for
form
everyone in the
expert
group.
groups. It's like 2 groups. One is the original group, then they form their expert groups, and then they go back and report back to their original group what they did.
After saw the video.
Yeah, just seeing the video or reading the text or whatever.
Yeah. The problem there is that the classes here are 1 hour. And maybe this is not enough time to make.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? Depending, and everybody's different, they're all contexts are different. What we need to do, though, is be able to see if we're using the best are using our time effectively and efficiently.
Okay.
All right. One way to teach a class is lecture. And there's a misconception sometimes, and I'm not saying this is the case here, but
No.
sometimes we say, okay, I only have 50 minutes. I only have time to lecture. I don't have time for them to do activities. I just have time to lecture. I have to get through all of the whole book, right? I'm right here, and I only have one semester to get through the whole book, so I've got to lecture. Okay, so I lecture, and so the idea is, though, the question then becomes, well, what did the students learn
Yeah.
or understand, right?
Almost anything.
Right. And so your point is very important, where we have to decide, how can I use my time very wisely? I'm not saying never do lectures. But I'm saying is, okay, lectures is one way. All of these other things that we're talking about are other techniques. Now, of course, we're not every single day going to do a jigsaw. I mean, we're not every day going to watch a video. I mean, these are just tools. These are just things that we can throw in there when we know our students aren't going to understand. Because imagine, it's hard enough in the native language.
Yeah, I do too.
Imagine students learning English and you lecturing and talking for 50 minutes in English.
It's tired.
But how much are they going to, after 5 minutes? I don't know about you. Sometimes when I was learning Spanish, and still too, sometimes learning or listening in Spanish is work. It's not, it's trabajo.
Yeah,
No es decir,
it's intensive.
tranquilo, escuchar.
No, you need to put
Tienes que
attention.
hacer con fuerza.
Yeah, you need to
Cuando
put
el
attention.
nivel es muy bajo, entonces hay que ver, ok, ¿qué puedo hacer como maestro? ¿Cómo puedo hablar? ¿Qué tipo de material en este caso que puedo utilizar? ¿Cómo pueden adaptar estos materiales para que los alumnos puedan entender y hacer algo?
Less content and more understanding.
Bueno, no quiero decir menos contenido, pero es cómo vamos a interactuar con el contenido. Es más sencillo. No es menos contenido, tenemos el mismo contenido, pero tenemos varias maneras para recibir, o los alumnos tienen varias maneras para recibir y también interactuar. Esa es la clave, interactuar con el contenido. Esa es la clave. Entonces tenemos que evaluar lo que estamos haciendo actualmente para ver qué puede ser igual y o diferente para apoyar a los alumnos que también están apoyando el contenido como igual.
These devices are incredible.
There's many
They put
things.
attention to these things.
And you say, pues no tenemos tiempo tanto para estar en clase. Ok, también, ¿qué pueden hacer ellos afuera de clase?
Yes, with the phones.
Como dices también, pueden ver los links antes de clase, de los videos. Tal vez tenemos que mencionarlo en clase.
Of course, in my class, not everybody bring a computer, but everybody has.
But everybody has a phone. Everybody has a phone. Everybody usually has connection to the internet here at the university, so most have in their homes or they can get access. So it's trying to use what they already have, what they already know, and try to bring it. Now, you might say, mis alumnos no están acostumbrados a hacer esto, tal vez, pero también no están acostumbrados a ver su contenido en inglés.
I am not. That's the problem. I am not.
Bueno, tal vez, pero mi punto
But
es este.
we need to change.
Tal vez este es nuevo para ellos, pero si ellos pueden ver que este le ayuda,
They use it.
van a hacerlo.
They use it.
Porque tienen una opción. Trabajar así de esta manera y entender mejor, o hacen lo que están acostumbrados, pero no entienden nada.
Yes.
And so when they know they're going to have an exam, right, and they're trying to learn, they're going to, I think, get down they get pretty quickly.
Yes.
I think based on my experience, many of my students are not used to working the way I like for them to work. But usually after week one, when we start to get into flow, like a rhythm, the technology, all that is like, okay, problem.
The technology operates so they come
Sí.
to the flow. To the flow.
Exacto. Y es un flujo, es como un ritmo de comunicación así de ir cada
Yeah,
día.
that's right.
Okay, good. Any other questions about anything that we haven't talked about? Or whether you want to talk about something similar, or an example, or something more concrete?
Literature native language text is okay.
Sorry?
No, I am reading graphic organizer is okay. Outlines. Outlines.
Outlines, como schemas, ¿verdad? Outlines. So, one way that we can make content easier to understand is having an outline. So, Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, and then Roman numeral 1, A, B, and C. So we kind of have an organization. Martin mentioned a guide. You might have a guide in the form of an outline, maybe, where you have categories and subcategories, and the organization of the content or the video or whatever it is. There's an organization there.
Okay.
And that could be in English, but just by having the organization makes it a little bit clearer. Okay, first they're going to talk about this, maybe. Then they're going to talk about this, or whatever. Okay, so outlines is another way that we can adapt content. And this can be done either before they access the content or the materials, or after, or both. Okay? So we're not talking about procedure here. We're not talking about necessarily how to do it. We're just saying that at some point using outlines is one way that we can make this information, this content from these materials more comprehensive, easier to understand. All right. Any other questions, Martin? We're okay with the terms?
No, I am trying to think how to adapt this new theory to my work.
Yeah, this is what I want us to think about this week is okay, the understandings, the essential questions, the declarative knowledge, and the procedural knowledge that we talked about last week. Now, what materials, more concretely, could I use only for this unit? No vamos a hablar así de todo el curso. Estamos todavía en esta unidad de una semana, 3, 4, 5 semanas. So what materials might I use? What ways might I adapt this content here? Okay, for my class. And the third thing we need to deal with too, with regard to materials now, is the actual activity. Now there's a relationship, right, between all these. But the meaningful activities here, I want to kind of show you a way to plan for these activities. And the best way to think about it is in terms of a backward design. A backward design. All right, this is coming from Wiggins and Mackay's book, Understanding by Design. It was published in 2005. And the idea of backward design, think of it like this. We plan classes. What do we do after we plan classes? Well, we plan classes and then we teach. So we teach, and then after the unit concludes, we say, okay, I need to evaluate my students. So I think of a way to evaluate, and we might apply tests, we might do some sort of evaluation of some kind. But usually the assessment comes after the instruction. The backward design is different. Okay? We still plan for the objectives of the activity, but before we start to teach, we think about the assessment. What are we going to assess first? Much like what we're doing now. It's like, how do we want to assess? What kind of meaningful activities do we need to come up with? So based on the desired results, remember that last week we talked about these understandings, essential questions, declarative knowledge, and procedural knowledge. How do these desired results relate to now what we're going to call a performance task? A performance task. Right? This is going to be our way of thinking about an activity that we might be able to implement in a class. So let's look at the performance task. Okay, so this is going to be an example of maybe one performance task that we do for maybe this unit. What would it look like? Well, to do a performance task or to create a performance task, we can think of it as being having a GRASPS framework. And this is an acronym, GRASPS, for GRASPS. So for this activity, this performance task, we need to have a goal. Now the goal is a realistic and as authentic goal for this activity as possible. This is not a learning goal necessarily. This is not a learning objective. This is a goal for the students to perform the task. So whatever task you ask your students to do, there should be a goal for them for that purpose of doing the task.
Okay.
It's not to learn English. It's not even to learn the content necessarily, not how you're going to talk about it. You're going to present a goal that is authentic. Now, the authentic, so, I don't know, maybe we can think of an example. Is there an example in one of your classes where you've done some sort of activity, maybe an authentic activity that we can use as an example?
As a goal for them?
Yeah, or just to kind of get an idea of a task that you've had your students do as an example, and we can kind of come up with a goal for that particular activity.
But now it's that they can get it, no?
I'm sorry?
Would they get this goal? Would they? No, not us, no?
Yeah, hay tipo de actividad lo que hicieron en sus clases, en sus alumnos hablando en español. Como una actividad, no tanto actividad, pero una tarea, like a task that maybe it took 1 or 2 days or 3 days or even longer, but they had to complete a task for some purpose. ¿Pueden pensar en un ejemplo para?
For example, when we finish one unit, we close with a mesa redonda,
Okay.
a workshop,
All right. A round table, maybe.
Round table.
Round table.
table, for the purpose is connect all the knowledge in this unit.
All right. And your students are, you're in medicine, correct?
In medicine, yeah.
All right. Think of, is there a situation, maybe it's a round table scenario, where you doctors are sitting around a table where they would have to do some, like communicate something in a real life situation. Think about an activity where your medical students did something, but it was a more real life situation. Like, can you come up with maybe an example? Maybe it's part of their practicum, it could be, or maybe just in general, just so we can use it as an example.
Usually, the topic is some problems about some diseases, for example.
Okay.
In the anthropology, is an example is what about menopause?
Menopause?
And one psychiatry, sociology, anthropology, gynecology, and work social, social work. And the students hacen preguntas cada uno de ellos relativo a lo que el maestro aquí da una clase, lo que ellos aprenden, pero cuando vienen expertos fuera de la universidad, es una oportunidad para que pregunten lo que no se puede resolver
Alright?
en la unidad.
Alright? Think about a doctor who is an expert in menopause, and some sort of, a situation where a doctor who's an expert in menopause would have to address some of these ideas of social work or psychology, or I don't know, maybe it's explaining the diagnosis to a family member, or maybe it's explaining, I don't know, maybe if the patient's suicidal, maybe what kind of situation would a doctor find himself or herself in where they would have to communicate or do something or with the patient or someone else using some of the terms and knowledge that you're trying to, that they're learning in the class? Can you think of a situation? Just kind of imagine a situation.
From the table is, I just prefer that it's for you to say in situations of conflict.
Situation of what?
Conflictos.
Conflicts, okay.
Conflictos en la práctica médica.
Alright. So sometimes doctors conflict.
¿Qué hacer
Okay.
cuando pasa eso?
Cuando no pasa, ¿qué?
¿Qué hacer
When
cuando
it
pasa
happens.
Alright. Okay, so you have a situation where two doctors don't agree with how to treat
The
someone
diagnosis.
with menopause.
Diagnostic.
Puede ser?
Diagnostics, procedures, and prognosis.
Sí, puede ser prognostics, pero two doctors or a group of doctors don't agree. Puede ser un ejemplo, una situación
Yeah.
que es.
In the same way, the menopause, the woman is going to be crazy or not crazy.
Okay.
Is problem is a psychologist or is an endocrinologist or is social.
Okay. All right. So here's a goal. You set up an activity with a group of students, a group of doctors. Okay. Your students are learning these concepts. There's a woman, and you give the situation. You're the teacher. You give the situation. There's a patient who is suffering, has menopause, and she's suicidal, or whatever. You give the symptoms, or you give the situation. And then the student doctors, their goal is to correctly diagnose, and persuade the other doctors who might disagree. So imagine you have groups of 4, and you tell, okay, each of you have to disagree. It's like a role play.
Yeah. So.
And so the doctors, you give the situation, and each doctor has to justify their diagnosis or their treatment or whatever based on this one patient. So this is the goal. The goal is not necessarily to learn the concepts. The goal is to convince the other doctors that your treatment is the best for this particular patient.
Goal for the.
So this is the idea with the goal. So the goal is not linguistic directly. The goal is not to learn these concepts directly. The goal is to persuade other doctors and justify your argument for treating or diagnosing or this patient. Because to do that, they have to know the concepts, they have to know the language. Right? So the goal is kind of one of the hardest things to come up with when we're not used to doing performance tests. The goal has to be authentic. Think about a situation that your students would find themselves in their own profession, and try to make this goal as real as possible. As real as possible. Now the role is your students are going to assume a role. In this case, they're going to be doctors. or they're going to be specialties, they're going to have a specialty in menopause or whatever. And someone else, the other doctors, their audience is going to be either probably another doctor, or it could be the patient herself or himself. So the students have to assume some sort of role to achieve this goal. There's some sort of audience. The situation, just as we're talking about, what's the context? What's the situation? And you can help, as the teacher, you can help provide that context. What's the situation here? Okay, it's a woman, she's 50 years old, she's had this type of background, she's suffering menopause, we present the context.
The negotiation.
And then they have to negotiate, right? And then here we have product, process, and purpose. So as they produce or they take part in this task, what are they going to produce? Some sort of object, usually. What process or processes are they going to follow in order to produce this product? And the purpose is the why, which is the most important of all of this. Why are they doing this? Why do you want them to actually perform this particular task? So these are the things that we need to think about and ask our students, what's more important? Are we going to focus more on the process, or are we going to focus maybe on the product? Maybe in this case, in our example of medicine, maybe it has to do more with the process more than the product, maybe. But if doctors are going to do some sort of let's say that you want your doctors to present some innovative way to help a patient with menopause. You might have them do some sort of brochure and present with this brochure this new way of treating patients with menopause. But this is a decision you make, and you help the students make some of these decisions. Any of these options that the students can decide for themselves, the better. Of course, we as the teachers can decide all of it. But when the students themselves can decide what the goal is, the students themselves can decide what role they're going to take, the students can decide who the audience is, the better. Because they're going to be more into doing the performance test because they are part of the design. The decision making. And finally, the criteria. You're going to be assessing what they do. So what are you going to be looking for? What are your expectations? What are the standards or the procedures that have to be done that you are going to be evaluating? Because they're going to get a grade for this. And they need to know what the criteria is. They need to know what the standards are, your expectations for doing all of this. So not just because they get a good grade, but more importantly, they're learning what they need to be learning based on the goals of the course. So this is what we're looking at. We have a performance task. This is an activity. We're thinking about a certain activity first, a way to assess our students before we even think about teaching. We haven't talked at all yet about teaching. We're talking about planning. How can we plan this activity based on certain materials that we can incorporate for our English language learners? And of course, how can we adapt this content? All within these three areas: activities, materials, and adaptation content. Now it seems like a lot of things here. But this week, I think the thing you need to do is to begin with this activity. Think about the GRASP framework and how we can communicate and list out this activity, thinking in terms of what materials and how we might adapt this content.
Okay.
All based on the desired results that we talked about last week. Questions?
So we saw it. Yesterday.
Sorry?
You saw it yesterday, no?
Well, on Monday we talked about these two, and we didn't talk about meaningful activities. So I guess it was new for today. But it's kind of a lot of information all at once. I want us to kind of start thinking about adding to what we had last week and thinking about a good performance test. Now, the GRASP framework you can find online. You can find framework, and this is, I would try to find it and
Grasp.
have.
Grasp, no?
All right.
This is a pro.
Here's a handout. Okay, what I just talked about. Keyword: real world goal. Notice that this doesn't say classroom goal or activity goal. This is a real world goal. Now, however authentic it is, whether it's a role play or whether they're actually in the field doing this activity, or maybe they're producing a web page for a real audience to help somebody. You decide how authentic it can be, but it needs to have some sort of real world goal. It needs to be communicated in a way that they might face this goal in real life. Real world goal, real world role, real world audience, and so on. All of it's in the sense of a real world situation. And here are some very good prompts. If we look at a goal, you might say, okay, your task is blah, blah, blah. Or, your goal is to, or, this is a good one, the problem. The problem, the challenge you have is you have to convince other doctors that you have the best treatment for this menopause, this patient, this menopausal patient who is also depressed, who also has this and this and this. Now, how do you do this? How do you communicate this? How do you communicate this to a family member? Or whatever. The obstacle to overcoming is. So these are some prompts to help you. You don't have to use all of these. Use one. Only choose one prompt from each of these that's most appropriate based on the context of your own class. So I'd like to start thinking about putting together performance plans and thinking about the supplementary materials. In fact, I'm going to include this link in OneNote. You can also search. There are other, let me see, supplementary materials, meaningful activities. So here, I'm going to go ahead and add a link. Also, double check everything in OneNote. I have a lot of presentations, everything that we talked about. You can also access the same information in OneNote.
OneNote.
Okay?
Here the lessons are good.
There's a lot of sways. I use sways for like as a presentation. So everything we talked about, you can access and view and ask questions about. So here we're going to have, let's see, grass, framework for performance tests. And we're going to make this a little bit bigger here. Okay, so you can access this link also if you want to use this, or just write it out on your documents. It's fine, whichever. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up. I think many of you have shared your notebooks. Creo que va a ser más fácil si yo voy a crear una sección para nosotros, para cada uno de ustedes, una página. Let's see. Okay, so the primera, participants, voy a agregar.
So we make the activities there or what?
Sí, yo pienso sería más fácil si cada uno de ustedes utilizan este espacio para cualquier cosa, si todo lo que estamos haciendo antes que subimos en su e-portfolio, creo que sería más fácil. Ya desde ahí también yo puedo verlo, dejar
Okay.
comentarios, creo que sería más fácil. Entonces,
We can share it, ¿no?
sí, ahorita hoy mismo voy a hacer esto.
Okay, that's all.
Entonces Martín, ok, aquí está tu espacio, y también Marcelo. Y voy a compartir con ustedes para que ustedes puedan editarlo. Nada más un favor, por favor, no, nada más trabajas en su propia página, no tanto cambiando el contenido de todo de OneNote. Entonces todo lo más va a ser así, nada más.
No, only our page.
Nada más su propia página pueden hacer lo que quieran. Si quieren poner su correo, voy a dejarlo que ustedes pueden editar OneNote, pero la idea es nada más editar su espacio. Y voy a mandar otra vez. Pueden entrar ahorita para ver si pueden editar, nada más, porque si no es necesario, no sé si, porque parece que Martín puedes entrar, o Bogar, no veo tu nombre, si quieres poner tu correo. Y Martín, si puedes checarlo y ver qué dices.
¿Puso arroba?
Ah,